Salvatore "Sammy the Bull" Gravano, born March 12, 1945, is an Italian-American former underboss of the Gambino crime family. He is known as the man who helped bring down John Gotti, the family's boss, by agreeing to testify against him and other mobsters in a deal in which he confessed to involvement in 19 murders. Originally a mobster for the Colombo crime family, and later for the Brooklyn faction of the Gambino family, Gravano was part of the group that conspired to murder Gambino boss Paul Castellano in 1985. Gravano played a key role in planning and executing Castellano's murder, along with Gotti, Angelo Ruggiero, Frank Nasico, and Joseph Armone. Soon after Castellano's death, Gotti elevated Gravano to underboss, a position Gravano held at the time he became a government witness. At the time, Gravano was the highest-ranking member of the 5 families to break his blood oath and cooperate with the government. As a result of his testimonies, Gotti and Frank Locascio were sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole and a $250,000 fine, on June 23, 1992. On September 26, 1994, a federal judge sentenced Gravano to 5 years in prison. However, since Gravano had already served 4 years, the sentence amounted to less than 1 year. He was released early and entered the U.S. Federal Witness Protection Program in Arizona, but left the program in 1995. In 1997, Gravano was consulted several times for the biographical book about his life, Underboss by author Peter Moss. In February 2000, Gravano and nearly 40 other ring members, including his ex-wife Deborah, daughter Karen and son Gerard, were arrested on federal and state drug charges. In 2002, Gravano was sentenced in New York to 20 years in prison. A month later, he was also sentenced in Arizona to 19 years in prison to run concurrently. He was initially scheduled to be released in March 2019, however, was released early on September 18, 2017. Childhood and early life. Salvatore Gravano was born on March 12, 1945, in Bensonhurst, Brooklyn, New York to Orlando, Jerry and Caterina K. Gravano. He was the youngest of 3 children, having 2 sisters. Both of Gravano's parents hailed from Sicily. His mother was brought to the U.S. as a child, while his father had been on the crew of a freighter when he jumped ship in Canada and entered the U.S. illegally. Gravano's father ran a small dress factory and maintained a good standard of living for the family. Early on, one of Gravano's relatives remarked that he looked like his uncle Sammy. From that point on, everyone called Gravano Sammy instead of Salvatore or Sal. At age 13, Gravano joined the Rampers, a prominent street gang in Bensonhurst. He had found that some people that had stolen his bicycle and went to fight the thieves. Made men who were watching from a cafe saw him take on a few people at once, and they gave Gravano back his bike. As he was leaving, one of the made men remarked on how little Sammy fought like a bull, hence his nickname, the Bull. Gravano had dyslexia, was bullied, and did poorly in school. Teachers classified him as being a slow learner, was held back from grade advancement on 2 occasions, and also punched school officials on 2 occasions. Gravano was sent to a school for incorrigibles. However, just before he reached the age of 16, the school refused to keep him any longer. Gravano's father tried to redirect and discipline his son, including forcing him to attend Mass, but had little success. In 1964, Gravano was drafted into the United States Army and served in Fort Jackson, South Carolina. While an enlisted man, Gravano mainly worked as a mess hall cook. He rose to the rank of corporal and was granted an honorable discharge after 2 years. In 1971, Gravano married Deborah Schibetta. They had 2 children. His daughter Karen Gravano appeared on the VH1 reality series, Mob Wives, beginning in 2011, and released a book in 2013 titled Mob Daughter. The Mafia, Sammy, the Bull Gravano, and me. Later in his mob career, Gravano was ordered to help arrange the murder of his brother-in-law, Nicholas Gabetta. Gravano is also the brother-in-law of Gambino Caporegime Edward Garofalo and Mario Garofalo. Gravano was a childhood friend of Colombo crime family associate, Gerard Papa. Colombo associate the Mafia had a long-standing presence in Bensonhurst via the Profaci family, which evolved into the Colombo family. Despite his father's attempts to dissuade him, Gravano, like many of his Ramper colleagues, drifted into the Cosa Nostra. He first became associated with the Cosa Nostra in 1968 through Anthony Sparrow, whose uncle Shorty was an associate of the Colombo family under future boss, Carmen, the Snake Persico. Gravano was initially involved in crimes such as larceny, hijacking, and armed robbery. He quickly moved into racketeering, loan sharking, and running a lucrative poker game in the back room of an after-hours club, of which he was part owner. Gravano became a particular favorite of family boss Joe Colombo, who used Gravano to picket the FBI Manhattan headquarters as part of his Italian-American Civil Rights League initiative. Gravano's rise was so precipitous that it was generally understood that he would be among the first to become made when the Cosa Nostra's membership books were reopened. They had been closed since 1957. In 1970, Gravano committed his first murder, that of Joseph Colucci, a fellow Sparrow associate with whose wife Tommy Sparrow was having an affair. Gravano described the experience thus: "As that Beatles song played, I became a killer. Joe Colucci was going to die. I was going to kill him because he was plotting to kill me. I felt the rage inside me. Everything went in slow motion. I could almost feel the bullet leaving the gun and entering his skull. It was strange. I didn't hear the first shot. I didn't see any blood. His head didn't seem to move. I felt like I was a million miles away, like this was all a dream." The Colucci murder won respect and approval from Persico for Gravano. Gravano later became a mentor to Colucci's son, Jack Colucci, who became involved in the construction industry as a Gambino associate. Made man in the early 1970s, Colombo soldier Ralph Sparrow, brother of Shorty, became envious of Gravano's success, fearing that he would become a made man before his son, Tommy. This rivalry culminated with the death of Ralph Ronga, another Colombo family associate in Ralph Sparrow's crew. After Ronga's death, a rumor had spread that Gravano had attempted to pick up Ronga's widow Sybil Davies at a bar, though Gravano maintained that Davies was the one hitting on him. Ralph Sparrow used this rumor in an attempt to gain support to have Gravano killed, or as an excuse to kill Gravano himself. While Shorty Sparrow believed Gravano rather than Ralph, he and the Colombo hierarchy decided that to avoid conflict, it was best for Gravano to leave the Colombo family and join the Gambino crime family. Now, with the Gambinos, Gravano became an associate of Capo Salvatore Tado Aurello. Aurello quickly took a liking to Gravano and became his mob mentor. Around this time, Gravano took a construction job. He later claimed to have considered leaving the criminal life. A former associate, however, falsely claimed to the New York District Attorney's Office that Gravano and another associate were responsible for a double murder from 1969. After Gravano was indicted, he desperately needed money to pay his legal bills. He quit his construction job and went on a self-described robbing rampage for a year and a half. 1 week into the trial, the prosecution moved to dismiss the charges. Gravano later said of this legal problem, "That pinch arrest changed my whole life. I never, ever stopped a second from there on in. I was like a madman. Never stopped stealing. Never stopped robbing. I was obsessed." Gravano's robbery spree impressed Aurello, who proposed him for membership in the Gambino family soon after the membership books were reopened. In 1976, Gravano was formally initiated into the Gambino family as a made man. Gambino soldier in 1978, boss Paul Castellano allegedly ordered the murder of Gambino associate Nicholas Schibetta, a cocaine and alcohol user. Schibetta participated in several public fights and insulted the daughter of George DeSico. Since Schibetta was Salvatore, Sammy the Bull, Gravano's brother-in-law, Castellano asked Frank DeSico to first notify Gravano of the impending hit. When advised of Schibetta's fate, a furious Gravano said he would kill Castellano first. However, Gravano was eventually calmed by DeSico and accepted Schibetta's death as the punishment earned by his behavior. Another part of the motive for the murder was that Schibetta was suspected of being gay. Gravano later said, "I chose against Nicky. I took an oath that Cosa Nostra came before everything." Schibetta was dismembered and his body was never found other than an arm. Gravano later opened an after-hours club in Bensonhurst. The bar was the scene of a violent altercation one night, involving a rowdy biker gang intent on ransacking the establishment. A melee ensued, in which Gravano broke his ankle and the bikers were chased off. Gravano then went to Castellano and received permission to murder the leader of the gang. Along with Milito, Gravano hunted down the leader, wounding him and killing another member of the gang. Castellano was flabbergasted when he learned that grudge-ridden Gravano personally took part in the hit. Construction magnate like his predecessor Carlo Gambino, Castellano favored emphasizing more sophisticated schemes involving construction, trucking, and garbage disposal over traditional street-level activities such as loan sharking, gambling, and hijackings. Castellano had a particular interest in the construction business. Gravano began to change his boss cowboy image of him when he entered into the plumbing and drywall business with his brother-in-law, Edward Garafola. Gravano's construction and other business interests soon earned him a reputation as a good earner within the Gambino organization and made him a multi-millionaire, enabling him to build a large estate for his family in rural Ocean County, New Jersey. Flush with cash, Gravano also invested in trotting horses to race at the Meadowlands racetrack in East Rutherford, New Jersey. Gravano also became the operator of a popular discotheque, the Plaza Suite, in the Gravesend section of Brooklyn. Gravano reportedly made $4,000 a week from the Plaza Suite alone. Gravano also used the club as his construction racket headquarters. Simone murder. Gravano further ingratiated himself to Castellano when he interceded in a civil war that had erupted within the Philadelphia crime family. In March 1980, longtime Philadelphia boss, Angelo Bruno, was assassinated by his consigliere, Antonio Caponegro, without authorization from the commission. The commission summoned Caponegro to New York, where it sentenced him to death for his transgression. After Caponegro was tortured and killed, Philip Testel was installed as the new Philadelphia boss and Nicky Scarfo as consigliere. The commission subsequently placed contracts on Caponegro's co-conspirators, including Johnny Keys Simone, who also happened to be Bruno's cousin. The Simone contract was given to Gravano. After befriending Simone through a series of meetings, Gravano, with the assistance of Milito and D'Angelo, abducted Simone from Yardley Golf Club in Yardley, Pennsylvania, part of suburban Trenton, New Jersey, and drove him to a wooded area on Staten Island. Gravano then granted Simone's request to die with his shoes off, in fulfillment of a promise he had made to his wife, and at the hands of a made man. After Gravano removed Simone's shoes, Milito shot Simone in the back of the head, killing him. Gravano later expressed admiration for Simone as a so-called man's man, remarking favorably on the calmness with which he accepted his fate. Despite the fact that Gravano earned praise from Castellano for the killing, he revealed that this was a hit he will never be proud of. Fiala murder. By the early 1980s, the Plaza Suite was a thriving establishment. Patrons often had to wait an hour to get in, and the club featured high-profile live acts such as singers Chubby Checker and the Four Tops. In 1982, Frank Fiala, a wealthy businessman and drug trafficker, paid Gravano $40,000 to rent the Plaza Suite for a birthday party he was throwing himself. 2 days after the party, Gravano accepted a $1 million offer from Fiala to buy the establishment, which Gravano had only valued at $200,000. The deal was structured to include $100,000 cash as a down payment, $650,000 in gold bullion under the table, and a $250,000 payment at the real estate closing. Before the transaction was completed, Fiala began acting like he already owned the club. Upon leaving the Plaza Suite, Gravano called Garafola and set up an ambush outside the club, involving Garafola, Milito, D'Angelo, Nicholas Mormando, and Michael Tabat in the plan. Later that night, Gravano confronted Fiala on the street as he exited the Plaza Suite among a group of people, asking, "Hey, Frank, how you doing?" As Fiala turned around, surprised to see Gravano, Milito came up behind him and shot him in the head. Milito stood over the body and fired a shot into each of Fiala's eyes as Fiala's entourage and the crowd of people in the street dispersed, screaming. Gravano then walked up to Fiala's corpse and urinated on his mouth. Gravano was never charged for the crime. He had made a $5,000 payoff to the lead New York Police Department homicide detective Louis Ippolito to ensure that the investigation yielded no leads. Although Gravano evaded criminal charges, he incurred Castellano's wrath over the unsanctioned killing. Gravano attempted to lie low for nearly 3 weeks afterwards, during which time he called his crew together and made the decision to kill Castellano if necessary. Gravano and Milito were then summoned to a meeting with Castellano at a Manhattan restaurant. Castellano had been given the details of what Fiala had done, but he was still livid that Gravano had not come to him for permission to kill Fiala first. Gravano, however, was spared execution when he convinced Castellano that the reason he had kept him in the dark was to protect the boss in case something went wrong with the hit. Fiala's murder posed one final problem for Gravano in the form of the Internal Revenue Service (IRS). The high publicity generated by the incident triggered an IRS investigation into Gravano and Fiala's deal for the sale of the Plaza Suite, and Gravano was subsequently charged with tax evasion. Gravano was represented by Gerald Chargil and acquitted at trial. D'Angelo was later killed by a Colombo family associate celebrating his having been proposed for membership. The killer was then murdered himself on orders from the Colombo family. Aligning with Gotti in the aftermath of the Fiala murder, Gravano continued to focus on his construction business, branching out into the lucrative concrete paving industry. New York City's cement industry was controlled by 4 of the 5 families, which made millions of dollars by manipulating bids and steering contracts. Gravano said in 1998, "I literally controlled Manhattan, literally. You want concrete poured in Manhattan? That was me. Tishman, Donald Trump, all these guys. They couldn't build a building without me." Gravano eventually became embroiled in a dispute with business partner Louis DiBono, a member of another Gambino crew. A sit-down with Castellano was held, at which an irate Gravano accused DiBono of withholding $200,000 in payments for subcontracts and threatened to kill DiBono. Gambino underboss Neil Delacroix intervened on Gravano's behalf, and Castellano told the 2 men to end their business partnership, though Gravano's standing with the boss slipped as a result of the incident. Delacroix, however, was rising star John Gotti's mentor, and when word got back to him that Delacroix had supported Gravano, Gotti was impressed. During this time, the FBI had intensified its efforts against the Gambino family, and in August 1983, 3 members of Gotti's crew, Angelo Ruggiero, John Carneglia, and Gene Gotti, were indicted for heroin trafficking. Castellano was against anyone in the family dealing narcotics. Castellano planned to kill Gene Gotti and Ruggiero if he believed they were drug traffickers. Castellano asked Ruggiero for a copy of the government surveillance tapes that had Ruggiero's conversations. To save Gene Gotti and Ruggiero, Delacroix stalled the demand. Eventually, One of the reasons for Gotti's killing Castellano was to save his brother and Ruggiero. The FBI had bugged Ruggiero's house and telephone, and Castellano decided he needed copies of the tapes to justify his impending move to Delacroce and the family's other capos. When Castellano was indicted for both his connection to Roy DiMeo's stolen car ring and as part of the Mafia Commission trial, he learned his own house had been bugged on the basis of evidence from the Ruggiero tapes, and he became livid. In June 1985, he again demanded that Delacroce get him the tapes. Both Delacroce and Gotti tried to convince Ruggiero to comply if Castellano explained beforehand how he intended to use the tapes, but Ruggiero refused, fearing he would endanger good friends. 3 months later, Gravano was approached by Robert DiBernardo, a fellow Gambino member acting as an intermediary for Gotti. DiBernardo informed him that Gotti and Ruggiero wanted to meet with him in Queens. Gravano arrived to find only Ruggiero was present. Ruggiero informed Gravano that he and Gotti were planning to murder Castellano and asked for Gravano's support. Gravano was initially non-committal, wanting to confer first with Frank DeSico. In conversation with DeSico, both men voiced concern that Castellano would designate his nephew, Thomas Gambino, acting boss, and his driver, Thomas Bellotti, underboss in the event he was convicted and sent to prison. Neither man appealed to Gravano or DeSico as leadership material, and they ultimately decided to support the hit on Castellano. Castellano murder. Gravano's second choice to become boss after Castellano's murder was Frank DeSico, but DeSico felt John Gotti's ego was too big to take a subservient role. DeSico argued that Gotti's boldness, intelligence, and charisma made him well suited to be a good boss, and he convinced Gravano to give Gotti a chance. DeSico and Gravano, however, also made a secret pact to kill Gotti and take over the family as boss and underboss, respectively, if they were unhappy with Gotti's leadership after 1 year. The conspirators' first order of business was meeting with other Gambino members, most of whom were disaffected under Castellano, and gaining their support for the hit. They also recruited longtime capo Joseph Pine Armone into the conspiracy. Armone's support was critical. He was a respected old-timer in the family, and it was believed he could help win over Castellano supporters to the new regime. The next step was smoothing over the plan hit with the other families. It has long been a hard and fast rule in the Mafia that killing a boss is forbidden without the support of a majority of the commission. Indeed, Gotti's plan hit would have been the first off-the-record hit on a boss since Frank Costello was nearly killed in 1957. Knowing it would be too risky to approach the other 4 bosses directly, the conspirators got the support of several important mobsters of their generation in the Lucchese, Colombo and Bonanno families. Gotti and Ruggiero then sought and obtained the approval of key figures from the Colombos and Bonannos, while DeSico secured the backing of top mobsters aligned with the Luccheses. They did not even consider approaching the Genoveses. Castellano had especially close ties with Genovese boss Vincent Chin Gigante, and approaching any major Genovese figure, even one of their generation, could have been a tip-off. Gotti could thus claim he had the support of off-the-record contacts from 3 out of 5 families. With Neil Delacroce's death on December 2, 1985, the final constraint on a move by Gotti or Castellano against the other was removed. Gotti, enraged that Castellano chose not to attend his mentor's wake, wasted little time in striking. Not suspecting the plot against him, Castellano invited DeSico to a meeting on December 16, 1985, with fellow capos Thomas Gambino, James Filla, and Danny Marino at Sparks Steakhouse in Manhattan. The conspirators considered the restaurant a prime location for the hit because the area would be packed with bustling crowds of holiday shoppers, making it easier for the assassins to blend in and escape. The plans for the assassination were finalized on December 15, and the next afternoon, the conspirators met for a final time on the Lower East Side. At Gotti's suggestion, the shooters wore long white trench coats and black fur Russian hats, which Gravano considered a Brilliant idea. Gotti and Gravano arrived at the restaurant shortly before 5 o'clock and, after circling the block, parked their car across the intersection and within view of the entrance. Around 5:30, Gravano spotted Castellano's Lincoln Town car stopped at a nearby intersection and, via walkie-talkie, alerted the team of hitmen stationed outside the restaurant of Castellano's approach. Castellano's driver, Thomas Bellotti, pulled the car up directly in front of the entrance. As Castellano and Bellotti exited the Lincoln, they were ambushed and killed in a barrage of bullets. As the hat and trench-coated men slipped away into the night, Gotti calmly drove the car past the front of the restaurant to get a look at the scene. Looking down at Bellotti's body from the passenger window, Gravano remarked, "He's gone." Co-underboss and consigliere. The new regime after Castellano's death, Gallo, the only surviving member of the hierarchy, convened a three-man committee to temporarily run the family, comprising himself, Gotti and DeSico. However, it was an open secret that Gotti was acting boss in all but name, and nearly all of the family's capos knew he had been the one behind the hit. Gotti was formally acclaimed as the new boss of the Gambino family at a meeting of 20 capos held on January 15, 1986. Gotti, in turn, selected DeSico as his underboss and elevated Gravano to capo after Toto Aurello announced his desire to step down. On April 13, 1986, DeSico was killed when his car was bombed following a visit to Castellano loyalist James Filla. The bombing was carried out by Victor Amuso and Anthony Casso of the Lucchese family, under orders of Vincent Giganti and Lucchese boss Anthony Corello, to avenge Castellano and Bellotti by killing their successors. Gotti also planned to visit Filla that day, but cancelled, and the bomb was detonated after a soldier who rode with DeSico was mistaken for the boss. Bombs had long been banned by the Mafia out of concern that it would put innocent people in harm's way, leading the Gambinos to initially suspect that Zips, Sicilian mafiosi working in the U.S., were behind it. Zips were well known for using bombs. With DeSico dead, the Gambinos were left without an underboss. Gotti chose to fill that vacancy by naming Angelo Ruggiero and Gravano co-underbosses. Nicky Cowboy murder. The first person on Gravano's hit list after Castellano's murder was Nicky Cowboy Mormondo, a former member of his crew. Mormondo had become addicted to crack cocaine and was suspected by Gravano of getting friend and fellow crew member Michael Tabat addicted to the drug. According to Gravano, Mormondo started to act like a renegade, berserk. The final straw came when Mormondo announced he no longer wanted to be in the crew and planned to start his own gang. Gravano decided he couldn't take a chance because Mormondo knew too much, and he got permission from Gotti to kill Mormando. Gravano arranged to have Mormondo murdered on his way to a meeting at Gravano's Bensonhurst restaurant, Tully's. After assuring Mormondo of his safety, Gravano told him to pick up Joseph Parhuda on his way. Parhuda got in the backseat of the car and shot Mormondo twice in the back of the head. Mormondo's corpse was then disposed of in a vacant lot, where it was discovered the next day. Consigliere. Gotti was imprisoned in May 1986 at the Metropolitan Correctional Center, New York, while awaiting trial on Racketeer-Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act (RICO) charges. He was forced to rely heavily on Gravano, Angelo Ruggiero, and Joseph Pine Arm One to manage the family's day-to-day affairs while he called the major shots from his jail cell. In June, Gravano was approached by Ruggiero and, supposedly at Gotti's behest, given orders to murder Capo Robert DiBernardo for making negative remarks about Gotti's leadership. Gravano was friendly with DiBernardo and tried to get the murder called off until he had a chance to speak with Gotti after his trial. Ruggiero claimed to have met again with Gotti and told Gravano that the boss wanted DiBernardo killed right away. Gravano arranged a meeting with DiBernardo where Joe Parhuda, a member of Gravano's crew, shot DiBernardo twice in the back of the head as the underboss watched. Gravano later learned that Ruggiero was $250,000 in debt to DiBernardo and realized Ruggiero may have fabricated the orders from Gotti or simply lied to Gotti about what DiBernardo was accused of saying in order to erase the debt and improve his own standing in the family. In any event, DiBernardo's death proved profitable for Gravano, as he took over the deceased man's control of Teamsters Local 282. Gotti's trial ultimately ended in a mistrial due to a hung jury and the boss was freed from jail. Gravano's specific position within the family varied during 1986 and 1987. He started out as co-underboss with Ruggiero and later was shifted to co-consigliere with Arm1. When Joseph Gallo and Arm1 were convicted on racketeering charges in 1987, Gotti turned to Gravano to help fill the void, promoting him to official consigliere and making Frank Locascio acting underboss. By this time, Gravano was regarded as a rising force in the construction industry and often mingled with executives from major construction firms and union officials at his popular Bensonhurst restaurant, Tallas. Gravano's success was not without a downside. First, his quick rise up the Gambino hierarchy attracted the attention of the FBI, and he was soon placed under surveillance. Second, he started to sense some jealousy from Gotti over the profitability of his legitimate business interests. Nevertheless, Gravano claimed to be kicking up over $2 million each year to Gotti out of his union activities alone. With Gotti's permission, Gravano set up the murders of Tommy Sparrow and several other Gambino associates. Eventually, Gotti would name Gravano his underboss, and move Locascio to consigliere. In 1986, Gotti underwent a racketeering trial. Jury selection for the racketeering case began again in August 1986, with Gotti standing trial alongside his brother Gene, Willie Boy Johnson, who, despite being exposed as an informant, refused to turn state's evidence. Leonard DeMaria, Tony Rampino, Nicholas Carozzo and John Carneglia. At this point, the Gambinos were able to compromise the case when George Pape hid his friendship with Bosco Radonjic and was empaneled as juror number 11. Through Radonjic, Pape contacted Gravano and agreed to sell his vote on the jury for $60,000. On March 13, 1987, they acquitted Gotti and his co-defendants of all charges. In the face of previous Mafia convictions, particularly the success of the Mafia Commission trial, Gotti's acquittal was a major upset that further added to his reputation. The American media dubbed Gotti the Teflon Don in reference to the failure of any charges to stick. Turning government witness on December 11, 1990, FBI agents and NYPD detectives raided the Rave Night Social Club, arresting Gravano, Gotti and Locascio. Gravano pleaded guilty to a superseding racketeering charge, and Gotti charged with 5 murders: Castellano, Bellotti, DiBernardo, Liborio Melito and Louis Di Bono, conspiracy to murder Gaetano Vastola, loan sharking, illegal gambling, obstruction of justice, bribery and tax evasion. Based on tapes from FBI bugs played at pre-trial hearings, the Gambino administration was denied bail. At the same time, attorneys Bruce Cutler and Gerald Chargel were disqualified from defending Gotti and Gravano after prosecutors successfully contended they were part of the evidence and thus liable to be called as witnesses. Prosecutors argued that Cutler and Chargel not only knew about potential criminal activity, but had worked as in-house counsel for the Gambino family. Gotti subsequently hired Albert Krieger, a Miami attorney who had worked with Joseph Bonanno, to replace Cutler. The tapes also created a rift between Gotti and Gravano, showing the Gambino boss describing his newly appointed underboss as too greedy and attempting to frame Gravano as the main force behind the murders of DiBernardo, Melito and Di Bono. Gotti's attempt at reconciliation failed, leaving Gravano disillusioned with the mob and doubtful on his chances of winning his case without Chargel, his former attorney. Gravano ultimately opted to turn state's evidence, formally agreeing to testify on November 13, 1991. Gotti and Locascio were tried in the U.S. District Court for the Eastern District of New York before District Judge Leo Glasser. Jury selection began in January 1992 with an anonymous jury and, for the first time in a Brooklyn federal case, fully sequestered during the trial due to Gotti's reputation for jury tampering. The trial commenced with the prosecution's opening statements on February 12. Prosecutors Andrew Maloney and John Gleason began their case by playing tapes showing Gotti discussing Gambino family business, including murders he approved, and confirming the animosity between Gotti and Castellano to establish the former's motive to kill his boss. After calling an eyewitness of the Sparks hit who identified Carneglia as one of the men who shot Bellotti, they then brought Gravano to testify on March 2. On the stand, Gravano confirmed Gotti's place in the structure of the Gambino family and described in detail the conspiracy to assassinate Castellano, giving a full description of the hit and its aftermath. Gravano confessed to 19 murders, implicating Gotti in 4 of them. Krieger, and Locascio's attorney, Anthony Cardinale, proved unable to shake Gravano during cross-examination. After additional testimony and tapes, the government rested its case on March 24. Among other outbursts, Gotti called Gravano a junkie while his attorneys sought to discuss his past steroid use. On June 23, 1992, Glasser sentenced Gotti and Locascio to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole and a $250,000 fine. Gotti surrendered to federal authorities to serve his prison time on December 14, 1992. On September 26, 1994, a federal judge sentenced Gravano to 5 years in prison. However, since Gravano had already served 4 years, the sentence amounted to less than 1 year. Later life. Book and interviews. Later in 1994, Gravano was released early and entered the U.S. Federal Witness Protection Program. The government moved him to Tempe, Arizona, where he assumed the name Jimmy Moran and started a swimming pool installation company. However, in 1995, Gravano left witness protection and relocated to Scottsdale, Arizona. A federal prosecutor later said that Gravano did not like the constraints of the program. Gravano began living very openly, giving interviews to magazines and appearing in a nationally televised interview with television journalist Diane Sawyer. It was reported that he had undergone plastic surgery to his face. In 1996, his wife Deborah divorced him. In 1997, Gravano was consulted several times for the 1997 biographical book about his life, Underboss by author Peter Moss. In it, Gravano claimed that he became a government witness after Gotti attempted to defame him at their trial. Gravano finally realized that the Cosa Nostra Code of Honor was a sham. At this time, Gravano also hired a publicist, despite the fact Gravano complained often about the publicity-seeking Gotti. After the publication of Underboss, several families of Gravano's victims filed a $25 million lawsuit against him. Also in 1997, New York State took legal action to seize Gravano's profits from the book. During an interview Gravano had with the newspaper The Arizona Republic, he claimed federal agents he had met after becoming a government witness had become his personal friends and even visited him in Arizona while on vacation. Gravano later claimed that he didn't want the Republic to publish the story, but relented after the paper allegedly threatened to reveal that his family was living with him in Phoenix. The story so incensed his former mob compatriots that they forced the Gambinos to put a murder contract on him. The FBI alleged that Peter Gotti ordered 2 Gambino soldiers, Thomas Huck Carbonaro and Eddie Garafola, to murder Gravano in Arizona in 1999. Drug conviction. By the late 1990s, Gravano had re-engaged in criminal activity. He partnered with a local youth gang known as the Devil Dogs after his son, Gerard, became friends with the gang's 23-year-old leader, Michael Papa. Gravano started a major ecstasy trafficking organization, selling over 30,000 tablets and grossing $500,000 a week. In February 2000, Gravano and nearly 40 other ring members, including his ex-wife Deborah, daughter Karen, and Gerard, were arrested on federal and state drug charges. Gravano was implicated by informants in his own drug ring, as well as by recorded conversations in which he discussed drug profits with Deborah and Karen. On May 25, 2001, Gravano pleaded guilty in a New York federal court to drug trafficking charges. On June 29, 2001, Gravano pleaded guilty in Phoenix to the state charges. In 2002, Gravano was diagnosed with Graves' disease, a thyroid disorder that can cause fatigue, weight loss with increased appetite, and hair loss. On September 7, 2002, after numerous delays, Gravano was sentenced in New York to 20 years in prison. A month later, he was also sentenced in Arizona to 19 years in prison to run concurrently. Gravano served his sentence at ADX Florence, part of it being in solitary confinement. Gerard Gravano received 9 years in prison in October 2002. Deborah and Karen Gravano also pleaded guilty and received several years on probation. In November 2003, Sammy and Karen were ordered to pay $805,713.41 as reimbursement for court costs and investigative expenses relating to an earlier drug ring judgment. On February 24, 2003, New Jersey state prosecutors announced Gravano's indictment for ordering the 1980 murder of NYPD Detective Peter Calabro by contract killer Richard Kuklinski. Gravano denied any involvement in Calabro's death and rejected a plea deal, under which he would have received no additional jail time if he confessed to the crime and implicated all his accomplices. Gravano reportedly told detectives that if he had wanted to kill Calabro, he would have whacked him myself. Gravano's lawyer claimed that Kuklinski had tried to use the allegation to extort $200,000 from Gravano, which was later confirmed by the FBI. The charges against Gravano were dropped after Kuklinski's death in 2006. In August 2015, Gravano's request to leave prison early was denied for reasons citing his long-standing reputation for extreme violence. In 2013, National Geographic Channel dramatized Gravano's ecstasy ring in a scene in the Banged Up Abroad episode, Raving Arizona, televised worldwide. The episode told the story of ecstasy dealer English Sean Atwood, who is Gravano's main competitor in the Arizona ecstasy market. Gravano was listed as being in the Arizona State Prison System at SEO Special Services Unit. He was initially scheduled to be released in March 2019, however, was released early on September 18, 2017. References. External links: Sammy, The Bull, Gravano biography, CrimeLibrary.com, Salvatore Gravano, Arizona inmate information, Moss, Peter. Underboss. 1997. ISBN 0-06-018256-3. Documentary series from Core TV, Now True TV, Mugshots, Sammy the Bull Gravano episode 2003 at Film Rise. Book notes: interview with Moss about Underboss, Sammy the Bull Gravano's story of life in the Mafia, August 24, 1997.